War is usually remembered by its loudest sounds: the thunder of artillery, the crack of rifles, the shouted orders of men moving across ruined landscapes. History has been written in the language of generals and victories, of maps drawn and borders changed. Yet beneath that noise, quieter forces shaped the outcome of wars just as surely. They were not always in uniform. They were not always named. Often, they were women, carrying burdens that history rarely pauses to count. Before the first shot was fired, women were already at war. They prepared children for absences that had no end date, folded uniforms with careful hands, and hid fear behind steady eyes. Kitchens became places of strategy, not for armies, but for survival. How much flour would last the winter? Which neighbor could be trusted? What could be sold, saved, or sacrificed? These choices did not make headlines, but they kept families alive long enough for peace to have meaning. When men marched away, women stepped into the spaces left behind. Fields still needed planting, factories still needed workers, trains still needed schedules. In cities thick with smoke and worry, women learned to operate machines that shook the ground beneath their feet. Their hands grew calloused, their backs strong, their minds sharp with new responsibility. Many had been told their whole lives what they could not do. War ignored those rules. War demanded results. In the factories, time lost its softness. Hours stretched, days blurred. Women worked under lights that never seemed to dim, assembling weapons they hoped would end the violence quickly, even as they knew those same weapons would take lives. It was a contradiction they carried silently: patriotism mixed with dread, pride tangled with grief. Every finished shell or rifle felt like both an achievement and a prayer that it would be the last. Beyond the factories, women became the backbone of resistance. In occupied towns and shadowed streets, they passed messages hidden in bread baskets, stitched codes into hems, and memorized routes that could not be written down. They learned to smile at soldiers who did not know they were being watched, counted, measured. Courage here did not look like charging forward. It looked like waiting, listening, remembering. Some women carried weapons openly. Others carried secrets that were far more dangerous. A wrong word, a delayed step, a note discovered during a search could mean torture or death. Yet they continued, not because they believed themselves fearless, but because fear had become a constant companion. Living with it no longer felt like a choice. Hospitals and makeshift clinics became battlegrounds of another kind. Women served as nurses, surgeons' assistants, and caregivers in conditions that stripped humanity down to its bare essentials. Blood was everywhere. Pain had no schedule. Sleep came in fragments, if at all. They learned to read faces quickly, to know when a patient could be saved and when comfort was the only gift left to give. These women held hands as lives slipped away. They listened to last words meant for mothers, wives, sweethearts who might never hear them. They absorbed grief that was not theirs alone, carrying it forward because there was no time to set it down. When the wounded screamed, they stayed. When the dying went silent, they stayed. War asked everything of them, and they gave more than history remembers. At home, women faced a different kind of endurance. Bombings turned neighborhoods into rubble in minutes. Evacuation trains were crowded with fear and the weight of what could not be carried. Mothers learned to pack lives into single suitcases, deciding in seconds what memories mattered most: a photograph, a letter, a child's toy that smelled like home. Children watched their mothers closely during these times. They learned how strength could look like calm, even when the world was breaking. They learned how love could sound like a steady voice during air raids, counting seconds between explosions, turning terror into routine. These lessons would shape generations long after the wars ended. Women also bore the invisible wounds of war. Sexual violence, often dismissed or deliberately ignored, followed conflict like a shadow. Survivors were left to navigate shame imposed by societies that preferred silence to justice. Their suffering rarely entered official records, yet it altered lives in ways that no ceasefire could undo. Many carried this pain alone because speaking out risks being blamed, disbelieved, or erased. When wars dragged on, hunger became another enemy. Women rationed food with mathematical precision, skipping meals so children could eat. They traded skills and labor, turning scraps into sustenance. Recipes became acts of creativity and defiance. Survival itself was resistance. In prisoner of war camps and internment centers, women endured confinement with quiet resilience. They organized education, shared stories, taught children songs to remind them they were more than numbers. Even in captivity, women rebuilt fragments of normal life, understanding that dignity was something worth protecting at any cost. As wars shifted and borders moved, women often became negotiators by necessity. They spoke to occupying forces, pleaded for prisoners, argued for supplies. Their authority was unofficial but real, rooted in relationships and persistence rather than rank. They learned how to navigate power structures designed to exclude them, finding cracks where influence could grow. When peace finally arrived, it did not arrive gently. Cities lay in ruins, families were incomplete, trauma lingered like smoke in the air. Women were expected to step back, to return to roles that no longer fit the people they had become. Some were told to forget what they had done, to make room for a version of history that centered elsewhere. But forgetting was impossible. The war had changed them. Skills learned under pressure did not vanish. Confidence earned through survival could not be neatly folded away. Many women fought new battles in peacetime, demanding recognition, rights, and opportunities they had proven themselves capable of handling. Some succeeded, others were pushed aside, yet the shift had begun. War, for all its destruction, had cracked open rigid social structures. Women had shown what they could do when given no alternative. The world could not entirely unsee that. In personal spaces, women became keepers of memory. They told stories that textbooks ignored. They preserved letters, uniforms, and scars. Through whispered conversations and family gatherings, they passed down truths that official narratives left out. Memory became a form of resistance against erasure. Across different wars and cultures, the patterns repeated. Different languages, different uniforms, the same quiet strength. From ancient conflicts to modern battlefields, women adapted, endured, and influenced outcomes in ways that statistics struggle to capture. Their impact was not always immediate or visible. It unfolded over years, shaping communities, values, and futures. Children raised by women who had survived war carried forward lessons of resilience, empathy, and caution. Societies rebuilt with the labor and leadership of women often found new paths forward, even if recognition lagged behind reality. The untold impact of women during the wars is not a single story. It is millions of small moments stitched together. A nurse wiping blood from her hands before moving to the next patient, a factory worker pausing to read a letter from the front, a mother teaching her child to sleep through sirens, a resistance fighter choosing silence over safety. These moments don't end when the guns fall silent. They echo into peacetime, shaping how nations remember themselves. They challenge the idea that war is only fought by those who carry weapons. They remind us that endurance, care, and courage are forms of power. To humanize war is to look beyond the battlefield and into kitchens, clinics, classrooms, and crowded trains. It is to recognize that survival is not passive. It is active, demanding, and often led by women whose names may never be carved into monuments. Their stories matter not because they replace the stories of soldiers, but because they complete them. War is not only about how conflicts are won or lost, it is about how people live through them. And in that living, women have always been central. Even today, in modern conflicts, the same patterns emerge. Women organize aid networks, document atrocities, care for the displaced, and rebuild shattered communities. Technology has changed, media has expanded, yet recognition still struggles to keep pace with reality. Listening to these stories is not an act of charity, it is an act of truth. It reshapes how we understand history, power, and resilience. It reminds us that strength does not always announce itself loudly.
Sometimes it moves quietly, carrying the weight of the world and still finding room to hope. The untold impact of women during the wars lives in that quiet space, between the battles and the treaties, between the headlines and the footnotes. It lives in the ordinary acts that made survival possible and the extraordinary courage that made endurance human. And as long as wars are remembered, their stories deserve to be told, not as an afterthought, but as a foundation. Because without understanding what women carried through those years of fire and fear, we never truly understand the wars themselves.